Folks, Dave from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds, and I have Christopher Rowles with me today. Uh, this is your second time on the show. Last time we were talking about Izzy's Airships. This time, your newest release is got Bigby's name on the title, and you've even changed the title from what you were going to go with.
Yeah, I confess my original title was Bigby's Guide to Fisting. My wife threatened to leave me after that, so I'm not gonna lie. I think I made the better choice. She told me to rethink it, and then Bigby's Handbook just seemed like the single most obvious choice after that. It was I think it was the best choice. And,
rethink it, Chris, because I'm going to leave you if you don't.
Yeah, she was like, "That is so vulgar, and you're better than that."
It's all become so crystal clear to me now.
Yes. But I think it was a good choice. Yeah, so I'm really happy with the work itself. I will admit right now that it has sold a grand total of 20 copies at 99 cents. So, it bought me some McDonald's. But I think it was important for me to keep making stuff and keep it out there. But
hey, man, that's McDonald's for you and a friend.
That's serious nug money right there. Right, that's $10 American. So I'm Canadian, so that's like $15 Canadian. That is some serious nug money.
So what is in Bigby's handbook?
First and foremost, Bigby it starts off with a introduction by Bigby himself, and I'm trying to portray him as like a crotchety, just a spiteful old man, and he's only releasing this book because Mordenkainen has something coming out soon, and he's like, oh, everyone loves Mordenkainen, doesn't he? Like, oh, he's the only one on the Circle of Eight. I dare you to name another person on the Circle of Eight, right? You can't. And he's like, I hate Mordenkainen. So he's releasing this the intro. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it. It's like, congratulations on the single most important purchase of your otherwise bleak and joyless lives. Somehow you, a member of the unwashed masses, have managed to rise above your station in inferior birth and mustered the sense to get your hands on my book. You should feel proud of yourself. And then goes on to make fun of the Complete Arcane supplement that included his tomb as an adventure location. There was a 3.5 splat book called Complete Arcane that has Bigby's tomb as a dungeon. And he's like, I'm not dead, you idiots. Not my fault some author of a splat book wanted to capitalize on my supposed death. And then goes on to have a rant about, I bet you're all wondering why there's a common theme to all of my spells. And then says, I'll tell you why all my spells have gloves as a material component, as opposed to why they're all hand-themed, and then proceeds to just bullshit you forever. He's just an old, crotchety old man. So that's how it starts. And that sort of sets the tone for the book. And then that's followed by a new character background, which is one of Bigby's escaped evil clones. So you just woke up from one of his cloning chambers for one of his backup bodies, and now you're able to run amok, and you're just always evil. And the feature for that's kind of fun. If you go into any major dungeon made by any archmage, all of the traps in there will recognize you as Bigby, for good or bad. So some might let you in, some might be, oh, Bigby, my old nemesis. Or some would be, oh, Bigby, old friend. Then I come up with subclasses, which has got 3 new subclasses. One is the Bardic College of Funk Dancing for self-defense. The other one is the Monastic Order, the Way of the Distant Palm, which is uses Mage Hand to deliver unarmed strikes. So that was sort of like a mechanical exploration. And then lastly, there is the Mage Handymancer, which focuses on it's sort of how the Warlock turns one cantrip, Eldritch Blast, into its wheelhouse. This turned Mage Hand into its wheelhouse, and then offers additional options for your Bigby's hand. So it includes Clumsy Claw, which is a an arcade claw that picks up something and has a chance to drop it after it picks it up and moves it somewhere else. It says and it includes for best results, use around lava. And then there's Hucking Hand, which will pick up a willing creature or a rock and throw it at something. And then finally, at 14th level, it allows you to use 2 Bigby's hands at once. So you can like double deuce. It's called the double deuce. And then I come up with spells, and there's like a few really good gems in there. And the spells I want to get into in a bit, but I want to let everyone have a chance to like absorb that. I'm going to check the chat right now to see if anyone's.
So it's kind of written very like tongue in cheek.
Oh, it's very tongue in cheek. Oh my goodness. It's meant to have a lot of like the problem with so many rule books and splat books is that they're not fun to read. Like you tend to just have your eyes gloss over like walls of rules and whatnot. So I figured that if I could at least keep that entertaining, then people would want to be involved with it more, and they would. I don't want to write text that no one's going to read, right? So I could include like 1,000,000 spells in a book, but if they're all boring, no one cares. What's the point of writing? But if each one of them is also funny as hell, then at least people are enjoying the book that I'm writing, as opposed to like, oh, finally, how can I power game this? How can I power game this? You know? I wanted to add an extra layer of enjoyment.
That's kind of like the point that I've made numerous times about, you know, D&D books and RPG books in general is, you know, for the most part, they're not really fun to read. It's just that you're into the thing and you want to see how the thing works. So it's the process you have to go through. Like if you get a player's handbook style book, you're more likely to pick and choose like than read it from cover to cover. At least I am personally.
Oh, same here. And I think that's sort of like the curse of splat books. With splat books is you pick it up, especially third-party splat books, is you pick them up, you're trying to find something that benefits you and in your current situation or maybe in a future concept. You ignore the rest, and then you just sort of pray that your DM is going to let you use this splat book, which has no authority, and you maybe didn't even bring it in on session 0. And in all honesty, the chances of you remembering the splat book for the next session 0 that you have is minimal if all you're remembering is like 1 or 2 spells. You'll remember the spell and not the book. I wonder where the hell did I see this? Especially if you consume a lot of content. But if you make the book memorable, and it's funny enough, you can recommend it to other friends and to your DM, like casually, just be like, read this book, it's really great. And then the DM can read it for like the sake of enjoying it. And then afterwards, maybe you can sneak in like, oh, what about this spell? What about this subclass? That's like the biggest problem with splat books is one person reads it, either the DM or the player, and it's difficult to build that bridge. And I'm trying to make humor build that bridge.
I want to say one of the best RPG books that I've mostly read is probably Dresden Files' Fate, just because of the narrative style that it's written in, where you can enjoy the book for what it is, in addition to learning about how to run this RPG game.
I honestly haven't had the pleasure of that, sadly. My biggest experience that is the Star Wars RPG books, Star Wars Adventure RPG books from the mid-90s that also had a similar narrative style, and me being a kid loved them because they were also Star Wars. And one thing that was nifty was that the stat blocks were like every single skill or ability that someone had came with like a short snippet of text that described how they got it or why. So it really gave meaning to like, oh, this person is like +5 athletics or whatever. It's not just that one line. There's a context to it, and then that can, as a DM, that can flavor your descriptions. I like making every little thing meaningful, and otherwise you're just writing for yourself, and no one's really going to read it.
That is true. That is always the crux of creating content, right? Because we were talking about this a little bit before we got started. It's one thing to create the content, but if you can't figure out how to get it out there and have other people consume it and enjoy it, you might as well just put it on your hard drive someplace.
Oh God, that's true. And I have to say that with Bigby, one of my biggest problems was getting it out there. I think part of that's my fault because in hindsight, the book is in essence a splat book. As fun as I've tried to make it, it's got all the hallmarks of a splat book. It's got one background, 3 new subclasses, collection of new spells, and a collection of new magic items. call it a day. All it's missing is like a feat or two, and it's the same as every other splat book that's on the market right now. That's the format everyone's using. It wasn't unique, it didn't stand out, and I'm confident that within an hour, 3 books with a similar content structure were released. I don't think that I can say with a bit of conceit and vanity that none of them matched the creativity and awesomeness that is my books. I'm going to just smile about that. Like, none of them are as entertaining, but superficially it's difficult to get a lock on it, and there wasn't enough to discuss about it. And with that, like, it's Bigby's handbook. Oh, it's funny, Bigby's hand. Unless you played in the early 90s, you don't even really care about Bigby. Like, no one, like, Greyhawk hasn't been active as a campaign setting since 2000. Like, Living Greyhawk, I think, died in 2006. That's 12 years since Greyhawk was even relevant to a few people. That's if you played Living Greyhawk.
I played in a friend's online game that he was streaming on Twitch, and they were playing Greyhawk, and when I got in there, I was like, "You guys are playing Greyhawk, really? Do people even know what Greyhawk is anymore?"
Like, exactly. Like in the 3.5 players handbook, all the gods and goddesses that were presented were the Greyhawk gods, but you weren't given any geography. I think there was one source book written for Greyhawk in 3.5, and then after that, nothing really. Everything was set more in Forgotten Realms, and in 4th edition it was Nentir Vale plus Eberron and Forgotten Realms, and in 5th edition there's zero attention paid to it at all. So except for the new Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. That's the first whisper of Greyhawk we've gotten so far.
And even that, I think it's because he's actually visited the realms in the lore. So, Forgotten Realms is Wizards of the Coast cash cow. Like, let's call it what it is, and that, and that's why, both Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk are very generic fantasy settings for the most part, with Greyhawk being even more generic than Forgotten Realms, if it's possible. So,
yeah, and at least Forgotten Realms has. I'm not gonna take a crap on the Greyhawk novels, but I can confess I've never read a single Greyhawk novel. I know they exist, I've seen them, but I've never read one. Meanwhile, Legend of Drizzt, which is a Forgotten Realm book, has been on the New York Times bestseller list before. So if you have the choice between obscure Greyhawk books and a New York Times bestseller and a series that refuses to die, which one are you going to promote?
Well, yeah, and not only that though, like, Forgotten Realms actually had quite a few really good novels. Like, I kind of bash Forgotten Realms all the time because I just don't like generic fantasy for a campaign that I'm going to spend my dollars on. Like, I'm like, give me something I haven't seen before, something that's different. But as far as novels to read, I've enjoyed so many of them. The Spellfire series, the Moonsea trilogy, the Time of Troubles was great. I probably read like 20 different Drizzt books. So, there was definitely a lot of great, entertaining novels that were put there.
I completely agree. And with everyone that's consuming these novels, there's a great sense of the world, and it creates sort of like a common language for a campaign setting. So if you are going to release a module, it makes sense to work with the notes that people already can hum, then try and write a whole new song. Like, in terms of getting especially new players accessible into it, like, they've read these books, they're great books. Like, when I was in high school, there's a whole bunch of girls I knew that had read all these Drizzt and Forgotten Realms novels, but had never rolled a single die in their lives. And I think just working with Forgotten Realms is a great way to just bridge those gaps. I'm all for it for accessibility.
Even when I was in high school, every once in a while you'd see another nerd reading a Forgotten Realms book, but they weren't actually gamers, and that's kind of the cool thing. Like, for the Forgotten Realms has done that. It's bridged its way out to non-gamers as well as gamers.
Mm-hmm. So it makes sense for Wizard to focus on that, but I think that, like, Mordenkainen book at least is sort of a bone that they're throwing to us older players when it comes to things like the Blood War and the Mind Flayers and just the steeped interplanar, like Wheel of Planes sort of thing. Like, I actually really enjoyed the cosmology of 4th edition. I think it's the superior cosmology, the astral sea, the elemental ways, the elemental plane of chaos. I think that those were very accessible, and a DM could have a lot of fun with it. I think that the Wheel of Planes is a bit more rigid, but at the same time, there's so much history in the Wheel of Planes that I think this is definitely a bonus being thrown to older players to just sort of enjoy and relive some of like their old high school days and introduce a whole new generation to that mythology.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with the wheel than whatever they did with 4th edition for the cosmology. I played it for a while, but I never really got into the planes of it. I mean, I really enjoyed the introduction of the Shadowfell and the Feywild. I mean, we had previously done similar things in our own games anyway, so it just made sense. And the astral and other planes were already like that anyway.
And like, what was really good with the Feywild is so coming down the road, like way in the distance, I've got a book called 50 Shades of Drakes that deals with the 50 different colors of drakes and dragons in the monster manual. But I want to catch up on my the monsters from Oriental Adventures the dragons from Oriental Adventures, because I admit that's a bit of a gray spot for me. So I read through my old copy of Oriental Adventures, and I was reading about the spirit world and how it's this sort of blend between the fairy realm and also the ethereal plane. It was a transitive plane, it echoed hours, and it's the realm where like fae and elementals would live. And I immediately thought of like Spirited Away, and I thought of Princess Mononoke, and just all these wonderful Studio Ghibli anime works that came with it. And then I thought like, oh wow, I wish that there was a parallel with this. And there is. It's the Feywild. The Feywild has all of those traits, and it is 100% the spirit world from like some of these classic animes. And like, it's just never really been framed that way for me before. But there's so much narrative possibilities with the Feywild that I think wasn't covered with just the bland ethereal plane. I think that, especially because with the ethereal plane, it's sort of like, oh, a ghost is just this like specter that comes in, and there's no real context to it. A ghost is just someone who's died. Meanwhile, if you throw in the context of the Feywild and like the weird way that spirits interact and change, you have these ghosts that are more like the ones from Ghostbusters, where like people are like Slimer. You don't think of Slimer as being a human, more of just this spiritual gluttonous entity. And that sort of is made possible when you look at it through the Feywild lens. And I love the Feywild. I think it's one of the greatest ways that the planes have evolved in Dungeons and Dragons to include that. That's like my little rant on the Feywild. And for all of you Studio Ghibli fans out there.
So Elfbait wants to know, does your dragon book include the Viking Linnorms?
Oh, Linnorms. So, one sec. I just want to make sure, is that the World Drake, or is that, so I was going to include the World Drake, like the one that encircled the world. So Linnorm is gigantic windless dragon with long serpentine bodies. That is going to exist, yes. There's going to be the 50 that are in the monster manual, and then there's going to be sort of like a build your own Drake section, like taking from the different qualities of like drakes from around the world, and you can just sort of mix and match qualities to like build your own dragon. And also I wanted to include draconic motivation, draconic background, that sort of thing. I wanted to make it so that each dragon is unique and also has a place in your world that is meaningful, as opposed, because a dragon should never just be like, you find a dragon. You should be able to quickly create something meaningful for your game that enriches the world and draws players in. Dragons are like, they're half the game, right? And they deserve a bit of love.
Yeah, in our own homebrew world, we actually removed all the dragons to bring them back later and make them unique.
Well, that's like, you made them all unique in your game? Like you just...
So in essence, right, we we've kind of had this thing. We have we're kind of affectionately referring it to the cosmic closet, where where the gods do something, it gets messed up, and in typical fashion, instead of fixing it, they just they just basically sweep it aside into a pocket dimension and be like, we're just not going to worry about this now. So at one point there was a war with dragons, so all the dragons were kind of just put in their own closets. So the first introduction is just, it is something like I'm affectionately referring to the Dragon's Realms, and it's kind of, if anyone's a Richard Nax fan, you'd know he did a series of books called The Dragon Realms. But, where, there's a Dragon Emperor and his High Council, but that's where all of our Dragonborn are right now. But, we've alluded to the fact that there might be others elsewhere as well. So they're just not super common. We made our Dragonborn a little bit more rare in our world, as well as, like every dragon should be an individual. It's just not like this stat block in the monster book. Like, I generally rarely use dragons in my games because I feel like they're never like fully utilized, and they never have the impact that I feel like a dragon should.
I can agree with that, and I like the idea of their absence has made them significant. Like, even not having dragons in your campaign has made the dragons themselves significant. Like, I think that for dragons, their CR should always be 1 or 2 lower than it's actually listed. I think that way, because if it's a deadly or hard encounter, like no matter what, you should always lowball their CR, so when you use them, they always feel tougher. So that even if, like, because I threw a level, like a CR15 adult bronze dragon against a party of like level 10 adventurers, and they kicked the shit out of it. They did. And I felt that was, a bit anticlimactic because it wasn't statted hard enough. And I think that they should definitely always lowball the stats on dragons so that they're always a bit harder than everything. They should be the pinnacle of hardness for that specific CR category. If anything, just to give a memorable fight. But yeah, otherwise they shouldn't be chump change. Like, they should never ever be chump change, and their stats don't reflect how cool they are, and they shouldn't be on like a random monster table, that's for damn sure. But establishing like a narrative in order to get them into the game and make them meaningful is just a huge challenge, and that's sort of why that book's coming out, is to try and decrease that challenge and give DMs something to work with to just really give dragons the most bang for their buck. But
yeah, DM Don makes a comment. Dragons should be like they're presented in The Hobbit, Smog. Like, there's the build-up that went into Smog, and the idea, of even facing off against Smog was something no one wanted to do.
Well, like, in The Hobbit, like, Smaug was an ancient red, and he was like the last of his kind, and he was like an ancient red in D&D, at least still, like, that is a potent encounter. There is, no matter what level you are, like, because it's geared above level 20, you go in there with a party of 4 people up against a ancient red dragon in its lair, you're going to have a bad time. And I'm really happy with how they statted the like ancient dragons in D&D, but like exposing people to like wormlings or young or adult, that range could have been a bit tougher. It doesn't give that same, like, I would have limited dragons to like the like cap end of the heroic tier and cap end of like the paragon tier, so they have like a transitional feel to it. Maybe in order to progress from one to another, like killing a capstone monster like a beholder or a dragon or something like that would be like a rite of passage. Like, I think that might be like a fun way to handle it, but ultimately having like this scale of dragons doesn't have this like milestone feel to it as much as it should. That's like, I don't know.
It feels like Pokemon instead, right? Because you're just like, I'm just going to kill the next toughest dragon after this one.
Actually, like that, I think that one of the mistakes with dragons is that they made them like a granular CR. Like they made a dragon for every level, basically. Like each of their CRs increases, so that you have like weak wormlings as whites, and then you have reds as the strongest. And they designed it so that you can face a dragon at any level at any CR. But in reality, you should have like maybe 3 or 4 categories of draconic CR. Like I probably have it so that every ancient is at 25, every adult is at 20, every young is at 15, and every wormling is at 10, or something along those lines. If anything, just to categorize them with the different tiers of play. And in doing so, create like this cool boss monster feel to it, as opposed to just something that you can encounter anywhere at any time, like a run-of-the-mill garden variety dragon. So yeah, I think they need a boss quality to them, as opposed to and not just a boss in a dungeon, but like a boss of your stage of life.
My first DM was like, all right, you guys want to fight a dragon? Fine, I'll show you what a dragon fight should look like. And this is in first edition, so you didn't have some of the tools that you have in later editions. And he was just like, all right, so he set the scene. You're fighting on the shifting mound of the dragon's horde, right? So you're on uneasy footing. It's a struggle just to keep your balance, and the dragon rears up, and the first thing it does is hover, and just starts beating its wings. And we just get encapsulated in a tornado of coins and dragon horde. Is the very beginning of it. It's like now you can't see. You're being pelted by coins, and you really wanted to drive home. Like, no, this is an epic monster. This is a primal force of the universe that you're taking on.
So I like to with D&D, like, we can't just focus on monsters. We have to focus on the environment and the terrain, and that's sort of like a flaw of the CR system, is that it doesn't take into account the cool things you can do with an environment, or dare say the dungeon that people are in. And what you're describing is like not just the dragon, but also the dungeon together, sort of becoming like the full experience. It's not just, oh, here's like a dragon in an arena. Like it's in its lair. It has a home field advantage. You are on this like shifting treasure hoard. With like the wing and the blizzard you're describing, it's just like this perfect interaction of all of the different elements of what can make an amazing campaign that I feel like we've kind of lost as we've gone more towards stats, and also there's more availability. Like, a lot of players look in the monster manual, they know what's going on, and also we're moving less from theater of the mind and more onto battle boards. So there's less room for that kind of narrative, and I think that's something that really needs to be brought back, is just like those cool narrative events and the interaction of a monster with its environment, and the PCs overcoming both. It's got to be the dungeon and the dragon together, which makes it a really awesome encounter.
I feel like 5e's moved in that direction, and that's what they're trying to recapture. But that was one of the things that I never knew that I lost from 3rd edition, was that because everything became so tactical, all the rules were written out. Like, in some instances, as long as your GM is there to have fun and help you tell an entertaining story, the ambiguity of the rules and having the DM use them to his advantage, it can be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. 3rd edition kind of takes that away. Again, at the same time, though, not all GMs play that way either, so that becomes its own problem. So it's like striking the balance has always been the struggle.
I feel like there was a need to try and standardize Adventure League play. Like, there was this, I think Wizards of the Coast saw that one of their best recruitment tools was Adventure League, or in-store play, organized play. And then with that comes a codification of rules to make it so that any given table is about the same. And 4th edition, I think, is the pinnacle of that. Is with 4th edition, like, traps were very well codified in 4th edition. They had CRs, they had very strict mechanics, and they were beautifully codified. I love that. If there's anything I really wish that we could have carried forward from 4th edition, it's the nomenclature and the mechanics of abilities and traps. But in doing so, it meant that there was a bit more preparation from the DM to conform things to this, like, nomenclature and to these statistics. But then there's also more resources that they could pick and choose from. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other in terms of the benefit to the game. But that codification, regardless, although there's tons of tools available to the DM, it still relied on the dungeon master's creativity. And this sort of catered to the lowest common denominator of, like, you don't need to be creative, just run the module. as opposed to now we're seeing some of the second edition creativity and like the DM's personal style coming back, even in Adventure League.
Yeah, I blame the clown, personally.
The clown?
Yeah, Ronald McDonald, the McDonaldizing of everything, so you get the same experience no matter which table you go to. And it really does make sense on certain levels, but at the same time, you do lose a little bit of something to do that. So we're at the halfway part, so I want to get into some of the stuff you were telling me about before we got started. Some of this cool stuff that some people may not be aware of with the augmented Twitter game that's going on.
Oh, shit. Yeah, no stone left unturned. Hashtag no stone left unturned. So right now, leading up to a new book that's going to be announced on June 1st, Wizards of the Coast is doing a alternate reality game. You can see it on their Twitter. Their main Twitter account, Wizards_D&D, announced a Twitter feed called Immortal Fortress, which is a servant of Elminster, which is searching for a stone that Elminster hid on Earth to save it from evil forces. Now, and then that introduced, in turn, led us on a bit of a wild goose chase to uncover another Twitter account called Glover's Travels. And Glover's Travels has a Yelp page, which ranks things in pipes, daggers, coins, and beds, which for any second edition super ridiculous nerd knows that not any, but if you've read Volo's Guide to the North or any Volo's guides that are tourism guides, you'll know that was how Volo rated various establishments in his old books. So it's established that Volo has been banished to our world. And on his Yelp page, like, this is ridiculous, on his Yelp page, he reviewed various game stores and other places around the world. And in each of the reviews, he hit a hidden password. Now, the game store that's just down the street from me, one of like 10 game stores in the world, was listed and had a password there. And as soon as I found out, I like abandoned my wife at a grocery store and I just drove there as fast as I could.
That's awesome.
I was like, I can't do this. I was like, honey, I have to go. This is some Ready Player One level shit. It's like, I get there and I'm like, barge through the door. And I'm like, wow. And they're like, congratulations, you're the first one. The key is not here. The key is in the mail. And I'm like, oh.
Well, that was anticlimactic.
It was. So I'm waiting for them to check the mail and to call me. But on each of these it's an actual key. Turns out it's like a golden looking key, but it's a USB key. And on it is a series of glyphs that don't match any D&D language that I've been able to research. But there's like focuses on Twitter now and a few people that have cracked the cipher to determine that each one of these glyphs has monster names in just like a substitution cipher, like one symbol equals another letter. So I think like Tarask has been unlocked, and there's a few others. And once we unlock those monster names, we don't really know what the next step is, but because everything's being released incrementally, and there's also a few of Volo's reviews that didn't deal with game stores. They dealt with things like wineries and like bars that might have clues that we haven't quite deciphered yet. But for the most part, there's this huge community engagement to try and sort out what's going on. And there's a few people whose keys are still in the mail, and that's kind of the holdup on this phase. But it's exciting to be like one of 10 people that was able to claim this moving forward. So that's, and it's believed that the next phase of it, like this is leading up to what's going to be announced on June 1st, I think on the Stream of Eyes, it's going to be an Undermountain adventure. I think they're going to bring back Xanathar. I think they're going to do some more Waterdeep stuff, and just have fun with some Forgotten Realms, second edition Baldur's Gate video game level stuff. So just bringing back the iconic Undermountain, Elminster's ever-changing dungeon. So it's all exciting there.
I mean, how crazy is that too? Like, we're using Yelp and Twitter to play, like this real geocaching D&D style mystery game.
Oh my god, it's in kudos to Wizards. This is very well thought out, very interconnected. Just like, yeah, going from Twitter to Yelp, and who knows what other social media, like what other social media accounts might be used next. Like, it'd be kind of funny if it was like next up on this old Foursquare account, or like on this like MySpace.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. That would
like
be funny.
Deep in the depths of this live journal. Like, this is a deep, long-term game, people. They've been preparing for this for years. Like, just that kind of thing. I'm curious to see where it goes. I'm excited. The clock is ticking because June 1st is the scheduled announced date for Project Broadway. Is the code name for this Project Broadway?
And that falls right during Stream of Many Eyes, right?
Mm-hmm. They're definitely going to be announcing whatever's up on Stream of Many Eyes, and that's going to be real. I'm excited because the next Adventure League season's coming up, and I think for people who do play Adventure League, they're getting kind of annoyed of not being able to resurrect this season. It's still Tomb of Annihilation for everyone out there that doesn't know. Like Tomb of Annihilation means that while the Lich Aesirach is doing evil stuff, no one can get resurrected, so death is permanent, and it's awful. Anyways, that's ending, and now it's time for Undermountain.
Well, welcome back to first and second edition.
They like this, and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes is like, hey, old guys, and I think they're trying to bridge the gap between old and new players, especially because I think they know that they have new players. Like, they got that market down pat. Like, it's still being like the Player's Handbook is still a bestsellers edition. I think that they did some market research, realized that there's probably some second edition and third edition and Pathfinder players that feel alienated, and they're just releasing like Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and this Undermountain thing to just tug on the heartstrings of anyone that's holding out and bring them back into the fold. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. I love it. I love what's going on.
Yeah, well, and that's probably fairly accurate because of where they've put their focus in the last few years. But as being one of those old guys, it's like, hey, don't forget the people that got you here. We're still here. We exist.
Well, that's exactly it too. Like that is the thing. Like, what about me? Like, what about everyone that like did get them there? And I can definitely see people feeling like just kind of shit on because of that, and I don't blame them. So I think this was really smart of them to do that, to just get everyone back into the fold and help reunite the schism in D&D that sort of happened because of like, I'm not gonna lie, that 4th edition did cause a schism, and I think they're doing their best to just get over that and help everyone come back to us. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah, like, just, I don't know. I'm kind of upset over the schism that happened in 4th edition. I think that a lot of things were blown out of proportion. I feel like a lot of emotions got tied into decisions, and then we had a schism in the community that hurt us. And I think they're doing everything they can to mend that. I think good on them, not only for themselves, but for their bottom line.
Well, they tried something different. It didn't work, and gamers are very passionate about their hobby. So,
don't change what I love.
Yeah, I'm just, I guess, a kind of a D&D brand fanboy. Like, I've played all the editions, and I mean, even though 4th was probably my least favorite, I never hated it. There was definitely things they added that I really liked, and if you look over my shoulder, you can see 4th edition books, and I got 3rd edition in front of me and 5th over here.
Like, I didn't want to say anything, but I definitely saw it. But I wasn't going to call you out on it. I wasn't going to let everyone else know.
That they know it, but we've played 4th edition for like 18 months, 2 years tops, and it kind of opened the door for us to move into other RPGs, because once it didn't feel the same way D&D has felt in the past. It was like there was no real reason to stick with brand loyalty. So, because they did create a whole brand new game from that. So we just
so different.
Yeah, so we fell into Mutants and Masterminds for a while, and we had a lot of fun with that.
I can't blame you on that. Like who could? Just, it didn't feel right. There was that hiccup, but for me, what it felt like for me was this oasis of like I'd been using an Excel character builder forever, and trying to get friends into D&D that weren't just like knee deep into it. Like the amount of source books required, the amount of book piracy that was going on, just the complexity of the game had gotten to be so deep that getting someone new into the game, like I've heard doing character sheets being described as worse than taxes, and it was true. And fourth edition was an amazing way to just compartmentalize the game and make it something you can do casually while drinking. And that wasn't for everybody, but it was definitely for me, because the original D&D was very overwhelming, and it wasn't something I could enjoy with my significant others. And that sucked. That made me, I don't know. I was really upset about that whole portion of it, is that there was very little accessibility to new players.
A lot of D&D over the years has always felt like complexity for complexity's sake. And there's other RPGs that are like that too, and I don't enjoy that aspect of the game as much as just getting there, playing, and it is nice when you can be like, oh, here's a character sheet for a new player, and just play, and you're gonna learn as you go and have fun. Compared to the old days of THAC-O, and it's like, what do I need to roll again?
what like there's just so much accessible about that, and I think we've taken the best of that moving forward, or most of the best of that moving forward, and I think this is the most accessible edition of D&D ever, and I think the numbers speak for it. And the DMs Guild has allowed people like me to create more products to make things more accessible, and I have a segue with the keyword accessible. I want to talk about one thing that I learned from Bigby's, like right now, if that's okay.
Go ahead. Jump in there.
Right, so with Bigby's, all of the chapter headings, like chapter 1 new spell, chapter 2 new spells, whatever, all of them are flanked on the top by different by the chapter name in sign language. Because I thought, hands, why not? Let's just put sign language in there and have ASL spell out all the chapter names. And then I included 2 spells that are meant to assist people with speaking, or like having to do the sign language. One of them is Bigby's Universal Gesture, which like everyone obviously was like, oh, Bigby's Obscene Gesture, or Bigby's Rude Gesture. And I thought, that's fun, but it's not cantrip powered. So I made it so that you could create an illusory glowing blue hand that could create one of 5 gestures that was universally understood. And this was danger, hospitality offer, hospitality request, peace, and then one just called my word, which is recognized as a universal obscenity, and all monocles which gaze upon it are thusly popped. So that was one where you could communicate non-verbally. And then my second one was Bigby's Elocutive Hands, again a cantrip. And during the duration of the spell, your hands can produce a steady musical hum. Spellcasters may use this hum as a verbal component for their spells instead of traditional vocalizations. Also, if you speak in a sign language and have your familiar present in your square, you may choose to have your familiar speak your signs aloud. It does so in a voice like one of your family members, but not quite. And this was part of a philosophy I had to allow for disability to have a representation in the game without erasing that disability. Like in D&D or in Star Wars or in whatever, if someone loses an arm or a hand or a leg or something, it'll always come back as either a robotic version of it, like a perfect prosthetic, or it'll be regrown. But there is something to be said for representing persons with disabilities in a game, and also allowing them to do so without like looking down on them, or the philosophy of disability in the real world is that no person is disabled, but we create a society and build things like stairs and build a world that they might not be able to access. So a lot of the barriers that people have are man-made. So things like prosthetics and wheelchairs are ways that they try to overcome those difficulties. So I wanted to try and represent those means of overcoming disabilities in D&D without actually erasing them. And the most reaction I've gotten from Bigby's, like half of my sales, has been from members of the deaf community, which is just, I wasn't expecting that, but it was just sort of this, reaction that people, it was the thing that people could discuss about it. And I mentioned this earlier when we were talking before, that when you release a product, unless people can talk about the product or about the idea of the product, it's going to get buried, and you're going to have to pay for advertising. Because if no one's talking about you, you have to shove your product in their face. So the one thing people talked about with Bigby's was the accessibility. And down the line, I am going to write, like this is 4 books away, Bigby's Guide to Accessibility and Disability. And I want to do it on having a focus on implementing disabled persons into your games, accessibility into your games, things like prosthetics or low-level spells that can help deal with disability because regeneration is super expensive, that sort of thing. So like, that, I just needed to vent, like just spew that out of my mouth for a bit. I know it was a mouthful.
You always get the person that wants to play the blind character or the mute character. But the mute character is just annoying because it's a game of communication. Like, so like having someone mime everything gets old really fast. But the blind character is like the idea that you're playing this character that's going to overcome this disability or this difficulty. But a lot of times they want to play the character without actually having the disability. And let's face it, you know, no one would probably choose to be blind. But, you know, because literally, you know, everyday environmental things become hazards to that person.
And that's, if one thing that I do want to like try is a monk that is blind, but instead of being like instead of having their blindness negated, the ability to spend key points to gain tremor sense, not a permanent tremor sense. They don't have the luxury of, not luxury, but we don't get to erase that blindness. Just they have the ability to use up some of their mental fortitude, and just, this is an exhausting act, being this perceptive, but they can gain tremor sense, which is a superior sense than just regular seeing in many ways. And then that's sort of like a counterbalance. That's sort of a way to, because some people are like, oh, I want to play a blind monk. Can I just play a blind monk? Like, and then list a million reasons why they can play a blind monk, all of which are insensitive. But if in the class mechanics you demonstrate the struggle of overcoming that disability without erasing it, but also still allow them to have like agency, and like your progress in the game world does that, like that, I think that could be a very powerful tool, but one that has to be handled with sensitivity in a lot of focus groups, because oh my god. But like, there is a niche to want to represent disability in your games, and a lot of people kind of want to do it, but they have no idea how. And I kind of want to broach that topic, get the conversation started in a good way, and I would then be donating all the profits I make of this to charity, like 100%. This would be a non-profit book for me. Like, I would just be doing this because I feel like I need to do this.
Cardboard Fortress says, try play a wheelchair-bound character and watch the game fall apart. And it's kind of it does, especially if you're talking like a fantasy type game. We played a Gamma World game that was based off of 4th edition, where I played a character named Ghost Rider, and he was an ectoplasmic wheeled character. So I just basically played him as a ghost that came back, but he was a person that was wheelchair bound before kind of coming back. So it became part of his like ghost form. But again, it was kind of cheating because it didn't affect him. It was just an aesthetic, really.
And like, that's the big thing, is to not erase the experience and to portray like the issues overcoming them, but in a way that's not, like, I don't want to use the word offensive, but definitely one that isn't derogatory. And like I'm seeing in the chat, someone's like, oh, we had a wheelchair-bound character that floated around on a Tensor's floating disc spell, and like that's a perfect example of magic being used to overcome a disability. And when it comes to a wheelchair-bound person being an adventurer, that definitely is a problem, and that might be one that would be very difficult to overcome without magic. And I don't want to fall into the trope of like, well, magic solves everything. There are people that can overcome these disabilities through force of will or through through artifice, ingenuity, but sometimes they are real. And the one thing that I am going to struggle with is things like, is disability full wheelchair? But if, let's say, you're a halfling or a gnome, you can just ride a riding dog in a dungeon and there's no problem. Like, you could have like a guide dog that hauls you around and you're riding it, and that's perfect. But for a human, you know, a guide horse doesn't really fit in a dungeon or in most people's spaces. And then, of course, there's also a section that I'm going to have on various laws on how things like guide animals and prosthetics interact with the law. And I want to make it as progressive as possible, so that way, if people just drag and drop these laws into their campaign setting, they don't have to worry about being not like insensitive, or I think derogatory is the best word. Like, it's not insulting. It's you, like in a law, in a fair and balanced medieval kingdom, like a guide animal is respected as part of the person, as being like a legal part of the person who it's guiding. Or like if you break someone's glasses, that's the same thing as punching them in the face and like blinding one of their eyes, kind of thing. It's I can't get over how passionate about I am this, and like I could go on, but it's so far down the hopper that. Anyways,
there is a couple other people talking about this stuff. When we had the folks on from Devil's Luck Gaming, they were kind of talking about it a little bit. Jennifer Kretschmer, I might be getting her last name wrong. Her Twitter handle is @DreamWisp. Is another one that's really passionate about this and has been working on this stuff as well. So there's probably some people you could reach out to and collab with on it.
And I'm working with local people as well. I'm trying to get autism, like an autism gaming group together, because of personal reasons, and also I believe that role-playing games are inherently therapeutic, and I think that there's an opportunity.
We've had at least one psychologist on that would agree with you, and is using that in her practice, and others are as well. We've had a guest on who's actually been prescribed D&D on a prescription pad.
I would love to reach out to these people. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, so that excited about that. But that is on my list of things to do. That is, I have a la cartes coming up. Then I have Dungeon and Dolces, which I would not be making if it wasn't for you guys. This is a dessert-themed, restaurant-based encounter. Like it's a module. It's an encounter module. The first one I'm ever going to write, because last time I was on here, I mentioned Bugbear Espresso once while discussing my latest release, and you guys just went crazy over different types of desserts and beverages. And I was like, all right, there's a market there. I'll release a quick little Dungeons and Dolces book. Then comes my DM guide for Izzy's, which will finally have all the maps for the books released back in January. Then Bigby's guide to accessibility and disability, and then finally 50 Shades of Drake. I have a very full hopper in terms of things that I have to make. Oh, I'll try for another year.
Well, that's good. That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, that's that. Oh my goodness. And I guess I'd like to pump the book that's coming out next week, because we have, we have 8 minutes left, and I want to talk about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
These Airshipped a la carte and some of the philosophy behind that. So, a la carte is coming out next week, and the rule book itself is using a design methodology that I've been wanting to experiment for a while, wherein the entire rule book is in-game. So the book itself is meant to be a book that the player purchases in the game world, and that the book you hold in your hands or on your tablet or whatever is the same book that the character will be reading. So there's no metagaming that's inferred from this book. You pick up this book, you read it, your character knows what you know. And the book is available for 50 gold pieces, the same as any other book in the Dungeons & Dragons world. So immediately there's this accessibility in the game, because it's just one thing that your character can buy. And then inside the book is a brochure from Izzy's slightly used airships, describing how there was a tragic fire, and in absolutely no, that destroyed some of their new imports that they had, and completely unrelated to that, they just had a windfall of insurance money, which has now been used to finance a new airship construction hangar. So they're now offering mostly new airships as well as slightly used ones. So with these, the premise is that you have this brochure, and then with them comes printer-friendly or full-color JPEG and PNG files that you can use to construct your own airship. You can either print them out and glue them together, or if you're proficient in Photoshop, mash them together and build an airship that you want. It's meant to be like building blocks for airships. And it explicitly says in the text, like, if you want to buy an airship, but like your master won't let you, you can always buy this brochure, build the airship model, and then use that to guilt them into letting you use it or letting you buy it. Like there's just sort of that tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, you're a player that wants an airship, why don't you put all this effort into it in advance, and then your DM will have to let you use it, sort of thing. Or so your master won't let you buy cannons because it says that there's no place for cannons in your life or whatever. That's okay. Respect their decision. Just ask them again when they're tired. That kind of thing.
Solid advice.
Yeah, and there's some tongue in cheek there, but the emphasis is that you're able to build your own airship. But the airship components, for the most part, are segregated into 4 different classes of airship. So there's not, you can mix and match if you want in some level, but you'll kind of be going off book and doing your own thing with a kit bash. But I created 5 classes of ships, each with their own unique components and a few general ones. But the intention is that it was difficult for me to balance everything across everything, and I didn't want to make a math system for what a small engine does on a big ship and a big engine does on a small ship. I just created a few customizable options for each class of ship so I can balance within that without having to have like walls of rules. And and then on top of that, one of the unique things that I did was I had features that were one of a kind, or at least were written as one of a kind. Like there's a salvaged goblin gun called 37, and it's just called 37, and it's a gargantuan creature in and of itself. It's a self-loading gun, and it has 37 notches on its side. Presumably that's the number of ships that it's destroyed. And it's one of a kind, and you bring it onto your ship, and it's got a few quirks on its own, and it doesn't quite like being not on a goblin ship. And I do this a few times. There's specifically salvaged parts that are unique in of themselves, and that way they can have quirks. And that's why I get to say that they're mostly new as opposed to slightly used. And there's also a few stylistic choices. Like instead of bomb bays, I just have cauldron bays where people pour alchemist fire from cauldrons over the side of the ship onto ships beneath them, as opposed to like loading bombs and ordnance. That just felt too modern. I went with something a bit more archaic and fun. But that's coming out next week, and everything's organized into 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, so everything prints out on everyone's printer. It's just meant to be something that you can do for fun at home and just make these resources yourself. So it's definitely a player and DM resource more than anything.
So
I have like 30 pages, all hand drawn.
Nice. So people can look forward to that. And that kind of ties into that, and the dessert book you want to do kind of tie into one of the comments from Cardboard Fortress. Anthony plays in one of our stream games, Ingest Quest. And I think they just recently had dessert encounters. Their whole game is a Spelljammer-ish type game based around, I believe they've been kind of hired to create like a unique cookbook for the galaxy, or for the verse, I think they're calling it. And so the characters are all very food driven. Mm-hmm. And like they've been in cooking competitions, and I think they had some problem with like a chocolate volcano was one of the more recent. So it's always based around food and airships, or Spelljammer ships. So it'd be right up your alley.
My God. All right. Well,
it's been touted as the best cooking RPG stream on the net.
that's something. That is something. I will note that there is a kitchen add-on for every single one of my ships. Every single one of my ships either comes stocked with the kitchen, or you can purchase a kitchen for it, which is, I just did that because people need to eat, and why not? But apparently there is a demand for spell jamming kitchens. So take that. And each of my ships has a spell jamming upgrade, because of course it does. Like, why would I release a book about airships and not include a spell jamming helm? Some of them even have death helms, which require a living sacrifice. But all in all, like, that's that's what's coming up, and I'm glad that I had the foresight to include cooking in it. So there's that. Oh, there's definitely bathrooms. To answer Kurt, I have several different types of bathrooms that you can put into all the different types of ships. There are tiers of bathrooms.
So now I feel like in your random encounter tables in a world with airships, you know, where does that flush to? So someone on the ground has the chance of randomly encountering that. Worse than birds flying up from above you.
Oh my goodness. That's unfortunate. I might have to make a random encounter for that. My God.
It's raining, but it definitely smells a bit like bugbear urine.
The goblin ship doesn't even have toilets. It just has a hole in the middle that's like their bomb bay, and that's just assumed that's where they all just go.
Of course, they're goblins.
Yeah, like the only person that has a private bathroom is the captain and the Hobgoblin Devastator. Also, the Hobgoblin Devastator is the only one with a bed, because wizards, right? Because wizards. But other than that, everyone just takes a crap right out the middle of the ship, and oh God.
So as always, folks, there are links in the description, so you can check out Brightshield on Twitter as well as on the DMs Guild. The one lazy guy, I believe he's visually impaired. Forgive me if I'm wrong. The one lazy guy in Australia there said he would love to collab with you on a disabilities book, and I said you should probably reach out to you on Twitter.
Yeah, go for it, and I'll definitely spin you out. Probably give you a free copy and help you play test with me.
So you can check out all that, folks. If you may or may not have noticed, Nerdarchy has put up a new video today in a style that we haven't used before. We did a 3-camera shoot with an actual filmmaker, and we were really happy with the results. So you guys can check that out. And that's pretty much it for today. I want to thank Chris for coming on. Guys and gals, go check out Bigby's handbook. It's only 99 cents. So thank you all for hanging out with us today. Greatly appreciate it. Until next time, stay nerdy.
See you guys. Stay nerdy.